You are watching or listening to Desert Planet Picks, and I'm about to ask a very special guest which 8 items he would take with him if he was about to be marooned on a desert planet. Hi, I'm JR. I am talking to Ian Smith of Last Night in Glasgow. Ian, hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Would you like to inform any of the listeners who are not already aware of this? What exactly is Last Night from Glasgow?
Well, I'm glad you got it right a second time because nothing gets me more annoyed than Last Night in Glasgow.
Did I say Last Night in Glasgow?
You
Do you know
did.
what? I had that in my head like ages ago
Yeah,
when I bought my first record from you, but I know it's wrong, and
yeah.
somehow I've still managed to do
It's
it.
okay. We get late night in Glasgow. We get one night in Glasgow. We get late night in Tesco. We get everything.
But
Uh,
it's I called you last night from
of course it
Glasgow.
is. It's an ABBA
Like,
reference.
how can you
Uh,
possibly get
and
it
every
wrong?
time we do anything and tell people it's an ABBA reference, about 1% of our customers suddenly go, course it is. Now it makes sense.
Yeah.
Uh, so last night
But,
from Glasgow,
but,
on
but
you go.
before, okay, but I was just going to say, you've brought it up. Do you ever get customers who go, oh, it's ABBA, and sort of turn their noses up a bit?
Well, of course they do. Of course we do. But then I point out to them that Benny and Bjorn, next to Paul McCartney, are the most important songwriters pop music's ever seen.
Yeah.
And I have an argument with them about it. I point out that McCartney's more important than Mozart. And generally, people who can't hold their own leave with their tails between their legs. Because if you don't love ABBA, there's something wrong with your brain.
Absolutely, fair enough. Right, last night from Glasgow then.
So, in a nutshell, we were founded in 2016 with a very small plan to try and set up a self manageable, self financing, not for profit record label. The idea was simply we find 50 people, those 50 people give us £50. We take the £2,500, we make 3 records. At the time, you could make records for about £800, £900. We'll make the 3 records. We'll make 300 of them. The 50 people will all get a copy of the record, and then the rest will be sold. The artists will get the bulk of the profits, and there'll be no debts to pay. That was the idea. Uh, we're now, by production, probably the biggest independent label in Britain.
Wow.
We are doing 31 vinyl albums in 2024. We're approaching 1,000 patrons. And the label is now much, much, much bigger than that core idea, but we still base our entire function on this simple idea that if we can get 1,000 people, and between that 1,000 people, we can raise now, it's about £100,000 we raise a year from that. That's enough money to more or less finance the manufacture of all the records we do. So none of the records can really lose money.
That's brilliant. Was it
And
because
as a patron,
oh
you
god.
get all those records depending the size of your membership.
Yeah.
And then the bands are able to either release an album that doesn't do very well but doesn't cost them anything, or in cases of some of the big artists that we have now, tour albums and generate significant and sizable return from touring merchandise without them ever having to spend any money on it.
Yeah, because actually the way the music industry works these days is there's not many people prepared to put the money in at the baseline.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it's a sort of self-defeating circle, isn't it? If nobody puts the money in at the baseline and you don't make the product, then it can just sort of turn into a vicious circle of nothing happening, can't it?
Well, there's that, but there's also the fact that the industry at certain levels is obsessed with streaming, which generates no money,
Yeah.
social media numbers, which generate no money. So really, what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years is we've found this real sweet spot for Last Night from Glasgow, where we are now finding ourselves representing bands who had previously been signed to major labels. who have gone through the 80s and 90s where thousands upon thousands of pounds was invested in them, but actually at the end of the day, they never made any money.
Right.
So you've got bands like the Bluebells, bands like China Crisis, bands like the Blow Monkeys, bands like the Skids, who had a great period, a great time when they were able to tour and go around the world and play shows. But actually, if you look at the artist's bank account at the end of all this hard work, there was probably nothing in it that came from their music career, because all of the revenue was being tied up in funding the machine that was so set on exploiting them. So we now find that a band like the Skids can go on tour 2 or 3 times a year, and we can just be supplying them with the merchandise that they need.
Yeah.
They're not paying any money to generate this merch. So the Skids are about to go on tour to promote Days in Europa's 45th anniversary. And we've just given the band 400 albums and said, sell them.
Brilliant.
Sell them, keep the proceeds. That's your earnings. And then we finance our side of the business from the 100 or 200 copies that we sell ourselves.
And also, this has proved so successful. I mean, it's only 8 years since it started. It's proved
Correct.
successful enough that you actually have, and this is probably just a minor part of what you do, but there's a little bit of arts funding comes in as well as part of the project, if I understand it right. Or there has been at times.
In terms of what, sorry?
In terms of making records for unsigned bands. As I understood it, I was reading about unsigned bands would be able to finance, or part of the financing for them to be able to make.
I mean, a great many of the bands that we put out were unsigned bands.
Well, absolutely.
This year we're releasing, I think we're going to release, I think it will be 31 records we will release throughout the year of 25. Now, that's not all the music we're releasing, it's 31 records we're making.
Right, yeah.
Now, those records will come from people like David Luxemon, that you'll never have heard of, Superhuman, that you'll never have heard of, Amy Duncan, that you'll likely never have heard of, and Edinburgh bands like the Cathode Ray and James King and the Lone Wolves and Miracle Mile from down south. These are bands that have never been signed to major labels. And if they were looking to release albums, they'd be looking at funding, or raising sizable amounts of money to be able to make a record, make a CD. What we're trying to do is say that it should be the record label's job, it should be the patron's job to ensure things are successful. And if you go back hundreds of years to the true advent of popular music, in inverted commas, Mozart and Bach were kept by patrons.
Yeah.
It was wealthy people were saying, here's enough money for you to live. You go and write me a concerto. Go and write me some chamber music. We have to get back to that. We have to stop seeing musicians as something we can exploit, and actually it should be something we support. So Last Night From Glasgow is driven by a concept that if you love music and if you love the arts, give us the money and we will do our best to support that infrastructure. So someone giving us £100 a year will walk away with 7 or 8 records at the end of the year. So they'll get the records very cheaply, but what they'll actually have done is they will have funded 10 to 15 records. So they won't get the same quantity back that we're investing of their money, but they'll get twice as much bang for their buck as they would if they were buying it from a record shop.
Absolutely.
But we are getting maybe 4 times the investment value. So every member probably produces twice as much as he takes, but he's still taking things at half the price he would be if he was getting it from HMV or FOP or whatever else.
It's a hell of a good model. Well, was it your idea? I know there were about 6 of you in at the start of it. Was it your idea, or because you've become the face of it, haven't you?
Well, it was my idea.
Yeah.
And the other 2 people with whom I shared the idea originally would not dispute that. And yeah, I mean, we can rewrite the history. History is told by the victors. None of the other 6 people have been involved in Last Night From Glasgow for the best part of 4 years.
Right.
Most of them haven't been involved for the best part of 7 years. I mean, no disrespect to them. They all thought it would be a little hobby. We'd meet in the pub once a month. We'd stand and talk about how great it was that we ran a record label. And it became pretty clear that I wanted to make this into something that was functional.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
And that's what always happens. I had no intention of setting up a business with 6 people. I invited 2 of my friends to help me start it. And then in a passing conversation with a third party, mentioned an idea to them, and he asked if he could get involved. And I then invited him to find 2 friends of his, because I thought, well, I've got 2 friends, you bring 2 friends.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
by the end of year 1, the 2 friends were gone. By the end of year 2, he was gone. By the end of year 3, one of my friends was gone. And by the end of year 4, my other friend was gone. So there's probably now...
But at least that got you all up and running, though, right?
What's that, sorry?
At least that got you up and running.
Yeah, it did. And there's no doubt that what we had at that time was we had people who could bounce ideas off each other. One of the co-founders, a good friend of mine, Andy, was really keen on us doing things properly. So he was very keen on, we've got to register a company, we've got to limit a company, we've got to set up our regulations.
Yeah, yeah.
And that stood us in great stead, because when we did get to a size that we were suddenly paying VAT and suddenly attracting corporation tax,
Yes.
we were ready for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's a crazy situation. I think we budgeted to make £6,000 in year 1, and we're going to be damned close to £750,000 at the end of this year.
Wow, that's really a success story. Tell me something. Is it primarily or exclusively Scottish-based bands or not?
No. So tonight, as I say, one of our bands is coming across from Nashville. Last year we had a band across from Melbourne that are signed to the label. China Crisis are on the label. They're from Liverpool.
Oh, right.
It's
Okay,
Material are on the label. They're from Liverpool. Miracle Mile are from the home counties. We've got In the Forest, who are also from kind of the home counties neck of the woods. Just last night, we put virtual pen to paper on a significant overseas artist. I can't say any more because we're not releasing it until next week. But no, the Glasgow reference is simply my love of ABBA.
Yeah, sure.
But also, it was easier to only deal with bands in your catchment area. But as soon as lockdown forced us into having virtual conversations, it made it irrelevant. I could be talking to someone on a computer in Govan. I could be doing the same in Melbourne.
Yeah, sure.
And as lockdown was the thing that changed our business massively. It changed our means of communication. We overnight, when COVID lockdown was announced, we instantly announced a charity album. We instantly announced an investment in local infrastructure of about £15,000 to £20,000, and we instantly quadrupled manufacture. Because we realised, I was a 45, 46-year-old guy at the time. My colleagues were 45, 46-year-old guys. We were all working from home. We couldn't go on holiday. We couldn't go out for dinner. We couldn't go at the pub. Christ, we were going to buy a lot of records.
Yeah.
And we instantly realised that what we should be doing is not slowing down and doing less, but actually doing more.
Because everybody else was in the same boat, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So we probably quadrupled in size in the first year of lockdown.
Wow.
And then from there, we've just been steadily growing 20% a year ever since.
Right. Well, Ian, I mean, we'll talk more about this later. Probably we'll talk more about this as we go along. But we are here to do a thing. And that thing is, I'm going to send you to a desert planet.
Yep.
And I'm going to let you take 8 things with you to the desert planet. And now I'm going to try and find out what those 8 things are going to be. And I think I'm going to save the music one for last, because obviously that's where we have to finish, right?
Yep. Okay.
Okay, then. First of all, I'm going to ask you, which book are you going to take to a desert planet?
I'm going to take Tom Wolfe's The Bonfire of the Vanities.
Okay. I've not read it, but I tell you what, I'm the only person on planet Earth who enjoys the film.
Well, I think the film's terrible. But if you've not read the book, you might enjoy the film.
Yeah, sure. Fair enough. So, but the book, it's a big, chunky, ironic book, isn't it?
it's a big, fat, manly American novel. One of my good friends is a guy called John McEwen, who was in a band called the 1990s. And John and I talk often about books and films, and he hates big, fat, manly American books and big,
Right.
fat, manly American novels and films. And I love them. I love things that you can really get your teeth into. And it is a very testosterone fueled, angry, embittered, ironic study of wealth and all the things that I hate, but told in such a beautifully Dickensian and tragic manner that you can't help but just get sucked into it.
It
And
is actually, you say that, it's the story, because obviously I know the story.
Yeah.
And I think the story before the film came out, because
Yeah.
it made such a splash. You're right, Dickensian, but
Yeah.
Dickensian in LA, right? Is the perfect way of
Absolutely.
describing it.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been, if it had been written, a couple of centuries later, it would have been Dickens writing it. It is about those big, broken characters, and even the heroes in it are completely unlikable.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not somebody that goes back and reads books a second or third time. Probably the only books that I've read multiple times would be things like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which you can't not but think, I want to read that again. It makes me laugh. But I think I read The Bonfire of the Vanities when I was probably 19, 20. And it's the one book that I can still pull out really vivid scenes from
Right.
and think just how impactful they were when I read them at the time. So it's a study of race, it's a study of corruption, it's a
Yeah.
study of, I mean, it is, it's like everything Dickens wrote combined in a modern day. And also it's a study about probably, I think, the onset of the decline of modern culture. If you look at where we are now and society's problems, Woolf was talking about the embryonic stages of these in The Bonfire of the Vanities. Celebrity being more important than what you actually achieve, money being more important than creation, power being the thing everyone is after. And if you look at, I mean, what's happening in the States just now, and I mean, I don't think Tom Wolfe could have dreamt up somebody as abhorrent as Donald Trump. But Trump is absolutely in there. Just somebody who's so full of hubris and self-worth, and so many people aspiring to be like him, whilst a lot of the sane world looks at him and thinks, you really are deeply troubled. But
Yeah.
And we've had that a little bit in politics in the last, 2 or 3 conservative parties. Nothing like to the same degree as we've got it in the States. But I think all of that is in The Bonfire of the Vanities. And I imagine if I read it now, I would find it a much more chilling book than when I read it as a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
Because it felt more fictional then. And now I think, my wife read it last year. I asked her to read it, and every night she was putting it down, quite depressed by it. Whereas I found it exhilarating.
See, I have. So, have you ever heard of Carl Hiaasen?
Of course,
I've
yeah.
talked to. Yeah, so Carl Hiaasen, I feel the same way about him, I think. Because, I mean, again, terrible film that I actually quite enjoy, but Striptease is just really, it's absolutely a book about the Trump presidency, if
Yeah,
ever there was one. And yet it was written 30 years ago.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Shall we move on to the next one?
Sure.
Okay, what food? So this is not a food to live by, but this is a food for pleasure, because you have sort of subsistence foods. But what food thing would you take? A meal
Well,
or an item or whatever?
well, anyone who knows me knows what my favorite food is. I'm a fanatic for raw meat. So I could eat steak tartare or sushi till it's coming out my ears. But I
Wow.
reckon if you're going to live off something for a long period of time, you need something with a bit of variety. And I adore Indian food. I could eat curries non-stop. But the thing I would take with me is a Portuguese franceschina. Now,
Now,
you might not know what that is.
no.
So most countries, so the French have got the croque monsieur. You know, the Germans have got, you know, their various takes on hot dogs and schnitzels. Well, the Portuguese have got a sandwich, really famous in Porto. And we went to Porto recently and spent days not eating one of these things because we just thought this is going to be terrible. And on our last day, we had one. And
Oh, you
what
should have done it
fools,
earlier.
what fools we had been not to have more of them. So it is crusty bread with basically ham, chorizo sausage, or a spicy Andalusian sausage, beef,
Wow.
occasionally, if you wish, an egg, cheese, more bread, and then it is topped with a beer tomato sauce
Wow.
and basically baked. So what you end up with is every kind of meat and protein in some bread with a beer gravy over the top of it. And it might sound utterly rank rotten, but I can assure you it's delicious. And I'm
I
thinking in that you could deconstruct it and make a few different things from it. So if you've got the components for it, then you've got steak and eggs. You know,
yeah.
you've got chorizo, you've got bread, you can do things. So I think, you know, in terms of all, I mean, I'm also Scottish, so you'll notice there's not a damned bit of vegetable anywhere to be seen.
And I'm
And
surprised it's not fried.
yeah, well, I imagine you probably could fry
Yeah,
it and then pour the
yeah.
gravy on top. But yeah, it's utterly glorious.
I have a sandwich that I make to take to work, and because I don't have the imagination to change it up every day, but at the same time I want lots of different flavors, my sandwich has got about 15 different ingredients. You know, just
Yeah,
a very thin slice of 15 different things,
yeah.
and it's just absolutely mad. But you never get bored eating it because all of those different flavors, every mouthful feels different from every other mouthful, and it
Yeah,
feels like a brand new sandwich every day, right? So,
absolutely.
and if you told people what was in it, they'd say you're mad, you can't eat that. And yet, if it
Yeah,
works, so I mean, this sounds like exactly the same
yeah.
same thing, right?
Get yourself a Franceschina. They're incredible.
Do you, so have you been back for more then?
No, but what we did was we looked up the recipes and we looked up how to make the beer sauce. And we've
Right,
got in our freezer are actually frozen sections of beer sauce that we've made. So when we
right.
fancy one, because the sauce takes a number of hours to make, so
Yeah.
you can't not do it properly. So Julia rattled up a whole vat of it and then froze them in components. So whenever we fancy
Right.
one, we can just defrost the sauce.
Oh, brilliant. Do you travel much then? And do you
Uh,
have to travel for the record label?
Don't have to and try not to because that would be us diverting money to things that are unnecessary.
Yeah,
We
fair.
are traveling next week. We're actually flying to Dublin to attend a film premiere because one of our artists, Nick Kelly, has made a film and it's going to be premiered at the Dublin Film Festival. So we're flying across to see that. But it will be the
Nice.
first time I think we've actually travelled anywhere far afield to attend some kind of junket. We've done a bit of, you know, attending gigs and putting shows on. In terms of holiday traveling, well, I've only been doing this job full time for the last 18 months. Prior to then, I had my own job. I worked, you know, so holidays were limited to the time you could get off.
Yeah.
Now that I run a record label, which basically I own, there's an awful lot more freedom to say we're going to go away for a couple of days.
Yeah.
So we probably travel now a little bit more than we used to, but then I probably spend 80 hours a week working. So
Yeah, it's
you
not
get to
like
a
you're
point where you're
working.
like,
Yeah.
I need to go on holiday now because if I don't, I am going to
Yeah.
burn this place down.
Well, that's it. If you're doing something you love, yes, you can put in all the extra hours, but you get to a point where you need to decompress.
Yeah.
And
And
so you've got
that's
to,
something that's become apparent in the last year. Prior to the last year, I would happily work and work full-time at my job and to an extent full-time at LNFG, and would still only maybe take a week's holiday a year. But having gone full-time and the amount of work that's now involved in running this label, I think I can get to a Friday night and just not want to see the place until at least a week. Because it is incredibly high pressure, and we have an incredibly large amount of customers and patrons. And I love our customers and patrons, and I love the fact they feel engaged. But I have to be honest and say that when I get about 100 messages a day from people speaking to me like I'm an intimate friend of theirs, asking me for information, asking me to do things for them, it's great that I've cultivated that. But I don't imagine, most other CEOs are getting text messages from customers saying, "Can you put a record aside for me? I'll pop in on Wednesday."
Right.
So we've built a real community, but it's exhausting to run it.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, you are doing not just one job, but you're doing about 15 different jobs, aren't you?
Yeah,
Basically.
Well, we're a record label, we're a record shop, we're a fundraising company, we're a tour manager, we're a booking agent. We're doing everything.
Yeah. Right. Let us move on, though, with the next choice. I'm going to ask you, right, this is a difficult one, or maybe not a difficult one, but this is one of the ones that people say, that's an odd question. But I think it's an odd question that sometimes gives a nice answer. You can only take one photograph. What photograph are you going to take?
Well, I have two that I would struggle to choose from. And if I chose the first, basically they're both photographs of my family. Yeah. I have one that's important to me because of what it stands for, but I would probably just choose the one that's my favorite picture of my wife and son.
Right.
And I would probably just choose that. I've got a beautiful photograph on the wall over there of Julia holding Levin, my son, when he was about 6 months old. And it's just a beautiful photograph, and I love it.
Sure.
But the more interesting one to pick would be, because it represents something that we did that I'm really proud of. When lockdown started, our label photographer, a very famous chap called Brian Sweeney, who's one of Scotland's foremost artistic photographers. He's done things for the BBC, he's done things for major bands, PJ Harvey, Coldplay, lots of people. Sweeney contacted us to say, "I'm allowed to travel for work."
Aha.
And we said, "Yes, you are." And he said, why don't we do something? And we came up with an idea of inviting our patrons from all over Scotland to tell us they wanted it to happen. And Sweeney would drive to their house. And if it was too far, he would pitch a tent and spend the night. He would get up the next day. They would greet him from a distance from the door of their house. And he would stand at the garden gate and he would take a picture of their family in isolation.
Wow.
And then they would have that picture signed by Sweeney and framed. And we had about 60 or 70 people asking for this. And what they got out from it was they got a visitor.
Yeah.
So they loved it. What Sweeney got out for it is he got paid, because as a photographer, he wasn't going to make any money. And what everyone else got was a one-off portrait. So since we're on, I'll step away for a second.
I get it. Yeah. Why not? And so for anybody listening on audio,
our isolation portrait.
Oh, hold it up slightly higher, I think. Oh, yeah, there we go. There it is.
Okay.
People can see me reflected in it.
Yes, this is my wife, my son, and I looking out the window of our third floor tenement flat while Sweeney takes a picture from the ground.
Brilliant.
And all over the country are pictures of people waving from windows, people standing in doorways. And it was a really beautiful project to be involved in because it made everyone feel connected. And it gave Brian an opportunity to go around the country. And somebody whose life was meeting people, photographing them, he was looking at a year of no work. And we were able to keep him employed, keep him putting food on the table. He was self-employed. He wasn't going to get any government grants or be able to put himself in, lay-by or whatever. So Yeah, I'd probably take that because of what it stands for. But if you told me I could only look at one picture for the rest of my life, I'd grab the one of Julia and Levin that's right next to it.
Do you know what? I think there's probably room on the spaceship for two.
Well, I'll put them back to back, you know.
All right, let us ask you, what film are you going to take to the desert planet?
Uh, I'm going to take Mulholland Drive by David Lynch.
Yeah, big Lynch fan.
Huge Lynch fan. I wouldn't say it's my favourite film of all time. It's certainly top three. But it's the film that no matter how often I watch it, I spot another thing that further reveals what I know about it. So
Yeah,
if
yeah.
you're a Lynch fan, a great deal of what you do is spend your time trying to work out what's actually going on. And Mulholland Drive's, on first viewing, one of the most confusing films. And I think I've got it completely nailed down now. I think I know everything that's going on. And I love showing it to people and watching their bewildered face at the end, and then you saying, right, shall I explain it to you? But still, when I watch it again, you just notice little nuggets, little Easter eggs, little things he's dropped in there. And I guess what I really love about it is he'd originally intended that to be a TV series. He was hoping to make a 12 or 15 part series,
Right.
and he couldn't get it commissioned, and he managed to make one of the greatest films the world's ever seen. I know the BFI had it in their top 50 films of all time. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to take Casablanca because it's just glorious. I'd love to take Magnolia by P.T. Anderson because I adore that and I adore the soundtrack.
Yes.
Probably my favourite film is The Lives of Others, the East German movie about the secret police investigation of artists and, you know, bohemians. But they're all either too short or too chunky. Whereas Mulholland Drive's that really lovely 2 hours of substance, great performances, great soundtrack, looks absolutely delicious, and it's just brilliant.
Do you know what? I've not seen it. I'm a little bit of a Lynch. I think I'm a little bit allergic to David Lynch. And one of the guys on the podcast that I podcast with has been trying to get me to reassess. And finally, this year, I kind of basically twigged on a watch of the new Twin Peaks, the
Yeah,
latest one. I finally twigged with David Lynch and really enjoyed it.
I,
And
I I would have struggled to not pick Twin Peaks as my favorite TV show, and I think the last season of Twin Peaks contains two or three of the best episodes of television. I'm thinking about one of them just now, and my hair standing up in the back of my neck thinking about it.
right.
And it's an episode, you'll have seen it, where there's practically no dialogue but a man saying, "Got a light," walking around a gas station.
Yeah, yeah,
And he
yeah, yeah.
explains the birth of the cosmos in it. It's high art. It's exhilarating to watch. But I imagine most people would be 2 minutes into it and go, "I am turning this crap off."
The guy who I
But
podcast with thought I
yeah,
would get stuck on that episode,
I
but he was wrong.
I loved it. I could watch it again. Episode 8 of the new Twin Peaks. I could watch it again and again. Mulholland Drive, though, is a really linear movie. Uh, it doesn't, unlike Lost Highway and the one that followed it, the name of which I can't remember.
Inland Empire. Is it
The
Inland
Inland
Empire?
Empire. I had
Yeah.
the Empire. I couldn't get the other one. They're bewildering films, completely bewildering. Mulholland Drive has a spectacular halfway through it, all the characters change names.
Right.
But if you can get over that, it all makes sense. And
I can deal with that.
there's something really
Yeah.
great about watching a movie where in the ending of it, you're scratching your head going, "I don't understand that." And then you watch it again, and then you see it. And every time after you watch it, you have that sense that everyone in the room, surely they haven't spotted this. You know, I can't believe you haven't spotted this. And every time I show it to someone for the first time, they all react the same, completely bewildered. And that's just such a talent for a filmmaker to pull the rug from under your feet so brilliantly that you still can't work out, even when it's finished, what's happened. And you have to watch it a second time and go, I
Right.
get it.
Well, we did say after we did Twin Peaks that we were going to do Mulholland Drive next. And so I think that is definitely going to happen rather sooner than possibly later. Now, that has
The
to happen.
masterpiece.
Right. Have we just done your TV choice as well?
No.
Oh,
No.
okay. Let's do your TV choice now then.
Okay. Every one of my choices comes with a here's why I didn't pick the more obvious thing. So I didn't pick Twin Peaks, obviously, and I didn't pick The Wire, which I would argue is probably the best American TV show ever, nor did I pick the show that I think is the best TV show ever, which is a BBC thing called State of Play from about 20 years ago, 5-parter about journalism.
Love that.
What a TV program. I'm going to go with, for repeat watching ability and the fact for 3 years, a couple of which were during lockdown, it provided more delight than any TV show I can think of, and it's Amazon Prime's The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which is a sensation of a TV show.
Right, I don't know it, so explain it to me.
Okay, so Midge Maisel is a 1950s Upper West Side mum. She's making meatloaves and attending to the kids. Her parents are, old school New York Jews. Dad's a professor. The mother is a housewife. Midge is married, and Midge's husband is a wannabe stand-up. Slight problem is he's rubbish.
Yeah.
Without boring you too much with the details, Midge and he separate very, very early on in the series, possibly episode 1. And she goes out drunk and visits the stand-up club he was at, wanders on stage and vents her spleen, and turns out she's funnier than Lenny Bruce.
Wow.
And the series is then 4 years of a New York housewife battling sex discrimination, marriage discrimination, job discrimination, every kind of battle she can have to establish herself as a stand-up.
It sounds like the utter flip of Mad Men. So it sounds like everything that Mad Men does, completely rethought from a sort of different angle.
Yeah, I mean, I found Mad Men deeply sterile and irritating, and I found it was lecturing me on things that I didn't need to be lectured on, and it annoyed me. Whereas Maisel is brilliantly funny.
Yeah.
Set and costume design is to die for. I mean, we went to New York last year, Julia, myself, and Levin, my son, and 2 of the things we had to do was go and eat in the diner that Midge goes to for breakfast, and go to the cocktail bar, which is the stand-up comedy club she frequents. And then we were wandering about the fashion district, looking at the place that our father-in-law had as a dress manufacturer. If you love New York, if you love stand-up, the people writing it are brilliant stand-up writers. The comedy's sensationally funny. The acting is sensational. The cast are magnificent. It's so delightful, so uplifting, so gorgeous to look at, that you can't not just want to immerse yourself in it. And it's got some of the funniest, huge set pieces I've ever seen. And if you're a fan of film, there's so many one-shot takes that take 10, 15 minutes, where a single camera is following a bunch of actors through a factory or through Coney Island. And the rehearsal and skill that must go into being able to do that. You can watch it from that side and just say, God, this is so brilliantly put together. Or you can just watch it as a brilliantly funny comedy show. It's an absolute dream. Everyone that I've recommended it to has come away saying it's one of the best things they've ever seen. I could watch it till the end of time.
Excellent.
And it had a proper ending. So unlike these things that run and run and run, it finished. And it left everyone wanting more. And that's the best thing a TV show can do, is like you going, why didn't they make a 6th season? Why didn't they do another one? Because it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect.
Right, changing the subject slightly, and not one to want to stereotype or anything, but given that you've got a Scottish accent, I'm slightly hesitant of asking you this, but what would be your drink of choice?
It would be a Gibson.
A Gibson, a beer?
No, a Gibson's a martini.
Oh, a Gibson. Right, sure. I know nothing.
So, I mean, I love beer. I love IPA. I could guzzle IPA till the cows come home. I really love a glass of wine. But the drink that I think most of my good friends know that I love is a Gibson, which is basically a very dry gin martini, but instead of it being served with a green olive, it is served with a pickled onion.
Yes, now you say it, I have heard of that.
And I've pretty much spent my life being the lone Gibson lover. I've not met anyone else that likes a Gibson. And people go, I like a dry martini, but the pickled onion sounds horrible. And a few weeks ago, I went out for dinner with 3 people I'd only met that day. I won't go into too much detail there because it ties to the other thing I can't go into too much detail about. But we all went out for dinner and we went to a cocktail bar, and the waitress came round and asked our guests what they would like. And the 3 of them said, can you do me a Gibson? And I suddenly thought, I have found my people.
Yeah.
And all night, the whole table was just drinking dirty martinis and dirty Gibsons. And it's one of those things, it's not a drink you can drink a lot of, but it's a drink, it's like a lot of my choices, there's a complexity to it.
Yeah.
If you don't fancy the drink, you've got a pickled onion. You know?
And you know what? Yeah, and you know what? You talk about the fact that they say, oh, it sounds a bit weird to have a pickled onion in there. I mean, if you sit back and think about it objectively, doesn't it sound a bit weird just to have an olive in there in the first place?
Yeah, of course it does.
Yeah, so I mean, a pickled onion is not really that much of a stretch
No,
beyond an olive.
but it adds a little nice vinegary kick to it. But
Yeah,
also what it does is it takes on the gin brilliantly. So what you end up with is a gin pickled onion.
right.
And again, I mean, the things, if I had the means to do it and the money and I could spend all my time, I would spend all my time in New York. And if you went to a bar in New York, even the worst bar would make you a perfect Gibson or a perfect, martini or a perfect Manhattan. In this country, we tend to think a cocktail is something that should come in a tall glass, be bright yellow, and have some stupid name. Whereas I guess, and this ties into Maisel, again, because Maisel lives in New York, and what do they drink in New York? They have martinis when dad comes home. And all of these things are just kind of things that, I guess I'm a bit of an old soul, and I like things that are done properly and well made. I like records. I like traditional drinks. Can't be bothered with all this newfangled stuff.
Right. Let me find out. And this cannot be a direct relative, so you can't take your wife or your son. Hence the photograph, I guess. But what person are you going to subject to your desert planet?
I'm going to take Taylor Swift.
Are you? That's
Yep.
a fantastic choice.
Well, why wouldn't I? I mean, I would take McCartney, but he's not got long to live. So that would be a bad choice because I've got about hopefully 20, 30 years left in me. So I'd like somebody who's going to outlive me. I'd like somebody who I consider to be the best songwriter on the planet just now. So that would be her.
And I'm going to stop you there because some people would be going, what's he talking about? But I've got to say, I absolutely, totally agree with you on that point.
I mean, I'm not saying she has written all the greatest songs of the last 20, 30 years because she hasn't, but nor has McCartney.
Yeah.
McCartney's the greatest songwriter the world's ever seen. And people will go, yeah, well, he wrote the Frog chorus. Yeah, he did. It's bloody lovely. He wrote it for kids. It's gorgeous. Yeah. Oh, he wrote Mull of Kintyre. Have you listened to Mull of Kintyre? It's a beautiful lullaby. It's a gorgeous piece of songwriting. People don't like nice. People don't like accessible. People dismiss songwriters for simplicity. It's incredibly difficult to be simple. The criticism that's always levelled at McCartney is, yeah, well, Yesterday's boring. Well, you write it. You go write Let It Be. You go write the long and winding road. Oh, he's all saccharine, golden slumbers. You go write it.
Yeah.
And I passionately think that Swift's in the same category. The girl's a revelation. She can write in any genre. She lyrically, I think, has got a stunning way with words. Very, very literal. I mean, and a lot of her fans feel the same way, and a lot of the people who dismiss her songwriting write it off as not being what it should be. I think she's got an incredible way with words.
People
She writes
want
songs that
songs.
say
Well,
what?
yeah, I was just going to say, people want songs about profound things, but there's nothing more profound than how a man and a woman relate to each other.
Of course,
And she captures that
she
in a
really
way that
does.
most people could only dream of.
Yeah, she does. And then wrap it up in the fact that she seems to be the nicest human being on the planet
Yes, absolutely right.
and is generally a really good egg. And I think it would be hard pushed to find her tiresome or
Yeah.
tedious.
Yeah.
And you could talk about a lot. And she's a prolific songwriter. And I think you should be. I don't understand people that. I mean, I love artists like the Blue Nile. I love them, but dear God, Paul, it's been 15 years. Release some songs already. You know, I read somebody I've been lucky enough to start to call a friend is Pete Paphides, the journalist, and I read Pete talking one day about McCartney, and he was saying people who look at McCartney's individual projects and criticise them need to realise that when McCartney passes, there will be a massive portrait of his life work, and you're going to have to step back and look at that body of work. Nobody has a body of work like that.
Yeah.
And I think, hey, she's not there yet, but if she keeps recording and writing at the rate she is, then 20 years from now, people are going to have to admit that she's that. And also, I saw her live twice this year and had the best time I've ever had at a concert in my puff. And I was in two venues. I was in Edinburgh and I was in Warsaw. I took my wife to Warsaw to see her, slightly against her wishes. I went to Edinburgh with a pal who's a mad fan. And we stood amongst 80,000 people, predominantly women of all ages. And every single person in that venue was being the best version of themselves, encouraging everyone to be the best version of themselves. There was no negativity, there was no snidiness, there was no sniping. And I left generally exhilarated by it. It was a
Yeah.
beautiful thing to be part of. And when I took Julia to see her in Warsaw, Julia felt the same thing. Here's 80,000 women in a room being really nice to each other, and 10% of them are men going, this is great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't hesitate. If McCartney had 20 years left, I might take Paul, but I think I'd probably still rather chat to Taylor.
Damn right. Great choice. Right. Final question. Well, final choice. And probably for you, got to be the hardest one, hasn't it? Or maybe it's the easiest one, but what's your music choice?
I'm taking Frank Sinatra's Songs for Swinging Lovers.
Oh, yes. Well, tell me when you first heard it.
I would have been 15 or 16. Don't know why I had I may be younger, around about the time that Frank played Ibrox. He came to Glasgow and played Ibrox. I can't recall when.
Yeah.
And I must have been a fan prior to that for me to have been wanting to go and see him. But I think my journey into it was as a fairly, I'm not going to say pretentious because it wasn't that, but I was always the person at school who was trying to live differently from everyone else when it came to music. And a couple of weeks ago, a chap I went to school with came into my work by accident. He was coming into the record shop. I hadn't seen him in 25 years, a guy called David. And we got talking, and David said to me, the thing I remember most about you, Ian, is that when you would come to school, you'd have a Stiff Little Fingers record in one hand and a Wham record in the other hand. And nobody could understand it. So somewhere in that journey, I decided I was going to start listening to jazz or easy listening. And I went out and bought a copy of In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning by Frank Sinatra, which is the companion piece to Songs for Swinging Lovers. And if you're listeners and don't know about them, I'll explain them in a second. But In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning is a very depressing and grim breakup album. And I adore it. It's my second favourite album in the world, to Songs for Swinging Lovers.
Right.
And it's got some glorious stuff in it. It's got Glad to Be Unhappy, which is one of the most beautiful songs. It's got Mood Indigo. It's got the title track. It's a beautiful record. And as I was, at school in 5th and 6th year telling my friends about how great this was, my best friend at the time, Colin, was telling me, you want to listen to Songs for Swinging Lovers. And I was resisting the happiness over sadness argument. And it probably took me another year to go and buy Songs for Swinging Lovers. And I did. And I put it on. And it's the greatest collection of songs ever assembled. It's the greatest band leader the world's ever seen, with the greatest version of his orchestra that's ever existed, with the greatest interpreter of songs at his greatest ever period.
On that note, it's my fervent belief that Frank Sinatra's is the greatest singing voice that's ever been committed to record.
I agree. He's not the greatest singer or vocalist,
but it's the greatest
he's
voice.
Got a timing and a style and a glint. People will argue that Dean Martin's a better singer or Bing Crosby's a better singer, but none of them have that impeccable, slightly imperfect timing that underpins the sentiment. So people who don't know, there's two really important things about these records. Prior to these records being made, albums didn't exist.
Yes.
So albums would have existed, 12-inch records with lots of songs would have existed, but they would have been collections of previous 7 inches or 78s or EPs. And Frank decided to go into the studio with an orchestra and make an album. And the intention being, I am going to make a concept. This is going to be a concept album. And the concept's going to be, I'm falling in love. And Songs for Swinging Lovers is that.
Yes.
I mean, it's How About You, Pennies from Heaven, Making Whoopee, and so many absolute belters. I've Got You Under My Skin. It Happened in Monterey. Songs that are the best things that Cole Porter or Hoagie Carmichael have ever written, with Sinatra at the top of his game and Nelson Riddle's orchestra just knocking it out the park.
I was going to ask if it was Nelson Riddle. I wasn't sure, but it's
Nelson Riddle. And then 6 months later, he goes in and records the breakup album In the Wee Small Hours of the Morning. So one is all big band, brash, booming, glorious excitement, and the second one is suicidally depressing. And I think as two companion pieces, they're just untouchable. I have artists. I mean, they're the only two Sinatra albums that I would hold as being in my top 50 or top 100 records, but they sit there so far above everything else as truly perfect examples of recorded medium. Every other record that I could go to, my favorite record, my friends will know, is probably Yankee Hotel Foxtrot by Wilco, but it's not an album I could listen to all the time. I'd have Abbey Road by the Beatles in there as something I absolutely adore and will steadfastly claim is the best Beatles album. And anyone who argues with me will be sorry they have done so. But still, no matter how much I love Abbey Road and love everything about it, there's no Octopus's Garden in Songs for Swinging Lovers.
Yes.
And I love Octopus's Garden, don't get me wrong, it's one of Ringo's best songs. But
it sticks
Songs
out.
for Swinging Lovers hits a home run, followed by a home run, followed by a home run, followed by a home run. You could listen to it back to front, front to back, in any order, and whatever order you listen to it in, the next song is better than the one before it.
Right, I've got a slightly difficult question for you then,
Yeah.
because on the audio version of this podcast, I always play out with a song, the
Yep.
song that has been, or 30 seconds of a song, whatever I sort of feel happy that I can get away with. There are so many well-known songs on there that people will know anyway. Do you want to nominate something that might be something slightly that they might not know so well?
Well, yeah, I mean, my favourite song on the album is the opening track, because it's the opening track of the album. And when I was out for dinner the other week with the people I can't mention, I was also out with my very good friends Jonathan and Amanda, who are in a band on our label called Sister John, and we got into a discussion about what would be your karaoke tune. Now, I don't do karaoke, but if you force me with a gun against my head, I would karaoke You Make Me Feel So Young by Frank Sinatra. So I would say, if you're going to leave with anything, You Make Me Feel So Young is a brilliant example, and it's got that fabulous Sinatra timing where he drops beats and comes in just behind the band or just after the band. It's glorious. And what an opening brass section.
Yeah. I used to write songs, not to any kind of a standard at all. But one thing I discovered during the journey of sort of first picking up an instrument and actually starting to make things that sounded like they might be worth listening to was, if you start the line or finish the line either slightly too early or slightly too late, it makes such a big difference that if you do everything in the exact right place. And yeah, that became a thing. If knowing when to come in, when to go out, and when not to come in and when not to go out.
And there's also a talent of knowing how to make it perfect and how to make it precise. And interestingly enough, the people that I've been singing the praises of, McCartney and Swift, are really great, purveyors of, this will be flawless. I am going to make this flawless. McCartney, to the extreme, can do that. And I think that's why people dismiss it, because they write it off as it's too nice, it must be too easy. Frank has that ability to make it sound like he's just walked in out the bar. Unrehearsed. And I'm sure he worked his bum off to do this.
Yeah.
But this album just sounds like a guy, effortless, Manhattan in one hand, fag in the other hand, and just singing. And what a collection of songs. I mean, there's no record in the world that could have that many world-class songs in it. Some of the best songs ever written. The best things Cole Porter's ever written, certainly.
Right, Ian, we are risking overrunning because we've been chatting and chatting away. So I want to ask you a little bit more about music before we go. And so I'll keep it fairly brief. Obviously, there's going to be a link to Last Night from Glasgow, in the show notes for the podcast and for the video. But just take a couple of minutes to tell people of something recent or something coming, or a couple of things that you've done that you feel really proud of, or just recommend 2 or 3 things to the listeners that they might want to go out and try.
There's lots of things I'm proud of. I mean, I think I'm not one to celebrate our own legend or celebrate our achievements. There's things we do and it makes you take a step back and think, wow, we've come a long way. So in April of next year, we will release Peter Capaldi's new album. And people who don't know it won't be aware that Peter was in a post-punk band in Glasgow long before he was an actor.
Yes.
And interestingly enough, when you tell people like Chris Thompson of the Bathers or Richard Jobson of the Skids or Bobby from the Bluebells that you're working with Peter Capaldi, they go, aye, of course you are. Because to them, he was always a musician. They were all knocking about together, they were playing. But what I love about that is, I mean, Peter Capaldi's a significant world superstar. And we can tell that because since we've announced we're doing Peter's album, our social media inbox is full of his fanatics asking for questions. Can you get me an autograph? Can you introduce me to him? So there's a real level of pride that in a very brief 20-minute conversation that I had with Peter, And actually, the story that leads to that is probably something that I look back on and think, wow, that's incredible. But that discussion that I had with Peter that led with him saying, "I sure, let's do this," that fills me with a great sense. And similarly, the conversation that I keep alluding to was very similar to that. It's people who you would expect to have vultures surrounding and actually sitting down. So I'm delighted that good people find or come to the conclusion that we are good people. I think we're in a society just now where everyone's obsessed about what flags you're seen to wear and what badges you're seen to represent. And no one's really doing the most important thing, which is just objectively being a good record label. You know, I've got political views. I'm a supporter of Scottish independence. Last Night From Glasgow doesn't support Scottish independence. I do.
Fair enough, yeah.
You know, I have views on how you should vote. I have views on all aspects of things, but the record label doesn't. And if you look around the world just now, record labels and arts companies are obsessed with representing something. How about just representing good music? That's
Right.
all we're meant to do, is put out good
Yeah.
music. Everyone else can worry about how to solve society's ills. Our job's to put out good music. Now, I'm not going to put out good music by dicks.
Yeah.
So if Trump turns round tomorrow and records Abbey Road 2, I wouldn't release it because he's an asshole. That's not something I would do. But I think what we're proud of is that, you know, the Skids are a very established Scottish band. They've been in many labels. They've been with us for 3 years and seem pretty happy. China Crisis are an established band. They've been
Yeah, yeah.
around the houses. They're with us. They seem pretty happy. And the final thing I'll tell you, which is the story that leads to Peter Capaldi, and it's the most name-droppy story I could tell, but it's true, and it just shows how far we've come. I was driving down to Salkers to see my father and mother. My mother was probably starting to die at this time, and we were going down to check on them. And I was on the phone to Richard Jobson of the Skids, talking about a Skids album we were doing, plans we had, and Richard Jobson's being his usual angry political self and very entertaining and talking about destroying the Tories and blah, blah, blah. And as I'm talking to Richard, my phone bleeps up with a message, and I see who the email is from and the opening line of it. And the opening line of it is, "Pete Perfidus says I should talk to you." And it's from Dr. Robert of the Blow Monkeys.
Yeah.
And I love the Blow Monkeys. And I've never met Robert and had no route of access, but had been saying to Julia, God, I'd love to work with the Blow Monkeys. What a great band. And here was Robert being introduced to me by my favourite journalist.
Yeah,
And you're
yeah.
thinking, man, that's a strange set of circumstances. And it was Robert who a week later said, can I introduce you to my friend? And I said, of course you can, not knowing who his friend was. His friend was Peter Capaldi.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that someone who was signed to Parlophone, was touring the world, was getting millions thrown at him and millions spent and millions lost. I'm proud that he felt enough affinity and connection to us that he could entrust us with his really good friend. And that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, that artists are willing to say, we're going to trust you with this. And hopefully, for the most part, if you actually do trust us with it, we'll do a decent job. But if your idea of trusting us with it is actually sitting on our shoulder telling us how to do our job, we won't do a good job, because that's not how business works.
Well, I think you've learned your business by now, haven't you? You've built it up into a pretty successful thing.
Yeah, but we're in a world now where artists are told to DIY, do it yourself. It's better to do
Yeah,
it
yeah.
yourself. It's not better to do it yourself. It might be better to do it yourself than let a nincompoop do it for you. But if somebody can do it well, of
Yeah.
course that's better than doing it yourself. That's why we
Absolutely.
have architects and house builders and car mechanics and nurses. You know, I'm not conducting my own dentistry.
Yeah.
But there's this crazy mentality. Oh, I've written the songs, therefore I know how to market them. You're the worst person to ask how to market them. You really are, because you're too close to it. And I think if you're the China Crisis, the Blow Monkeys, or the Skids, or the Bluebells, or the Trash Can Sinatras, or any of the big bands that we work with, they know their limitations. We're songwriters, we're live musicians, we want nothing else. Younger artists, no disrespect intended to them, are much more inclined to say, I can do everything, and are suspicious when someone comes along and says, well, we could possibly help you here. And that's why I think the age profile of our label has changed, and why we were representing lots of young bands. Now we're representing many, many more established artists. And it's because they can look at us and say, yeah, and they know what they're talking about. I've been here, I've seen this. I mean, we've worked with the Bluebells for nearly 8 years now, and Ken and David and Bob are incredibly good friends of mine. We're about to bring Graham Skinner from Hipsway, his new album, the Cowboy Mouth album, out. We've just this week taken delivery of an album by Port Sulphur, a band from Douglas McIntyre, who ran Creeping Bent and runs Fret Concerts, is the songwriter of. These are all people from the postcard era that have been in the Glasgow music scene right through the 80s, the 90s, the noughties. And they are now coming to us and saying, here is our portfolio and legacy. We trust you to manage that.
Yeah. Oh, we could talk about this for hours, but it's time for you to go. So, I mean, Ian, thank you for doing this. It's
Pleasure.
been so much fun. And, well, I mean, I can't honestly say that I've ever actually thought that I ever would say this, but you've actually given me an opportunity to be able to say this. But to play us out, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Sinatra. There you go.